Aloha mai kako, aloha kumukeli, and again, this is another lesson in Hawaiian history. I just wanted to share this short infographic that I created just to kind of go over these two gentlemen and the reports that they created as it related to the Hawaiian Kingdom. And so, big thing on the bottom, like I always say, believe nothing, validate every fact. So I did put some links down below to directly to the reports and to a couple other resources here for you to check out. There are many resources out there talking about these two gentlemen and what their role was in Hawaiian history. And so I just wanted to kind of go over them too and kind of talk a little bit about the what role did their reports actually play. Trying to do this as unbiased as possible and just providing as much information as I can. So again, we'll start out here with James Henderson Blount. He was born September 12th, 1837, and he died on March 8th, 1903. I start with him because chronologically, he was the first person that was commissioned to do an investigation on the dealings of what happened and on January 17, 1893, and some of the events that led up to it. So again, he was a congressman from Georgia. He was a prominent spokesman for white supremacy. He was an anti-annexationist. He felt that he didn't want to bring any more people of color into the country. He studied law. He was a lawyer at the University of Georgia. And he passed the bar there as well. He was also lieutenant colonel in the Confederate Army. So again, lieutenant colonel there in the Confederate Army from the South. And then he was also the chairman of the House Committee on Foreign Relations. During the time he was being commissioned to be the presidential envoy, he was not actually actively sitting as a member of the House, but he had already resigned that position before he was asked to be an envoy by President Cleveland. On the other side here, we have John Taylor Morgan, born June 20th, 1824, and passed away June 11th, 1907. He was actually commissioned by the Senate to actually hold the trial of ex-minister Stevens of the U.S. legation, the ambassador to Hawaii, to the Hawaiian Kingdom, and investigation with the USS Captain Wiltz, who was the actual commander of the troops that landed on January 16th, 1893 on Hawaiian Kingdom soil. And so here he goes. He was actually the second Grand Dragon of the realm of Alabama of the Ku Klux Klan. Below, I know some sources have said that maybe or he wasn't verified, but below the authentic history of the Ku Klux Klan, he's actually pretty prominent in that book. And so if you search Morgan in there, you'll come up, see they're talking about who he was and great things that he did for the country and that kind of stuff. So it's a pretty legit source there. He's the descendant of Clan Morgan of Wales. His family immigrated to America or into the United States. He was a brigadier general in the Confederate Army. Same army as James Blount as well. He was actually given his general commission by General Lee himself. Pretty interesting. He served 6 terms as a U.S. Senator in Alabama. One source claims that the Ku Klux Klan actually helped him get into the Senate, but I didn't find any evidence of that. But I just thought that was interesting. I'm not sure how much, not really familiar with all the ins and outs of the Ku Klux Klan, but I'm not familiar. I don't really know how much power they actually had in America or in the southern states of America. So more research needs to be done on that on my part. He was an ex-slave holder. I couldn't find any information from James Blount on whether he had slaves or not. So I can't really verify or not evaluate. I can't really validate that, chairman of the Senate of Foreign Relations Committee. It's pretty interesting how John Tyler Morgan was actually the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations, and then you see James Blount on the other side, chairman of the House. So again, we have the Senate and the House here. You know, different sides of the same legislative body. Yeah. Quote here from James Blount. It's from his report, 1,300 plus pages. It's reports, and he does quite a good. I don't know if it's good, but a pretty accurate report of the history of Hawaii in the beginning. He did interview many people, and so the reports are going back and forth for a long time to Department of State head Gresham during his investigation. It was noted that, and I was able to verify that he did not necessarily interview as many people who were a part of the insurgency. Whereas in the Morgan report, which is also linked below, not quite as intensive as far as the history of Hawaii and Hawaii's foreign relations, but still an intense report there. But that report, what I noticed too is he interviewed many people that were directly a part of the insurgency, but he didn't necessarily interview many people outside of that, where Blount's report actually interviews many other people, from just regular normal citizens to the police to the Queen, where Morgan's did not. And so it's a little bit different. His quote on Morgan's side was this. I found this inside that same resource down below. It says, "I was so excited that I came very near telling them on the Senate floor that I was a Ku Klux Klansman." And just give you a little background, basically, the Southern states were fighting the 14th and 15th Amendment, which was forcing them to change their ways and basically enforcing some racial freedoms and equality issues that the Southern states weren't ready for. And so he actually went on and did this great, according to the book, a great speech about that and about keeping separations of races separated from whites from blacks and different things like that. And so there's actually excerpts in the book of the speech. And I mean, as a person of color, it wasn't, for me personally, didn't seem that great. But again, from the authors of that book and the people from their perspective, it was a great moment for them, a very inspirational moment for them. But that's his quote. And I just thought that was pretty interesting how, we have resources. If you look at the resource from the, I guess it's like the United States Congress that has like their own archive, and they talk about him. There's no mention of his relationships with the Klansmen and all these pieces, even though he was actually in the book the second Grand Dragon from the realm of Alabama. So I'm just like, wow, he's pretty famous in the Klans book, but yet in the U.S. Online version of him, there's no mention of that. So pretty interesting there. So in relation to Hawaii's history, we'll start off with James Blount here. He was a special commissioner. James Blount arrives in the city of Honolulu and initiates a presidential investigation on April 1st, 1893. Of course, he is sent there by President Cleveland to do the investigation. During this time, he spends quite a while. So there, Blount submits his periodic reports to Secretary of State Walter Gresham in Washington, D.C., and on July 17, 1893, he presented his final report. So that's a pretty good chunk of time there from April to July to do his investigation. It's pretty interesting. In his quote above, this is what it comes up with, and this is actually from the report below, but it says, "No man can reasonably doubt the truth of the statements of the witnesses that Mr. Stevens had recognized the provisional government before Damien and Bolt had the police station house, or the police house." And so one of the mana'o nui that I want you to get from this is that in order for a revolution or an internal revolution to be successful, and then according to international law, another country can recognize them, is that revolt or that revolution, those insurgencies need to actually have control of the government, have control of the police station, the armed forces, and then also have the backing of the people. Those are the criteria that's stated before another country can recognize them as an independent, factual, actual government. Yeah, and so again, that didn't happen. According to Blount's investigation in relation to Hawaii's history, he's come to the idea, or the mana'o, that that didn't happen before Minister Stevens actually recognized the provisional government. Now, some people may dispute that in the Morgan report. That's very disputed. But on the evidence link below, the smoking gun, that's actually the link to U.S. legation on the U.S. legation paper from Minister Stevens, the guy we just talked about. That was the ambassador of the United States in the Hawaiian Kingdom. It's a letter from him, dated on that same day on January 17, 1893, to Stanford B. Dole, who was at the time one of the judges in the Hawaiian Kingdom government, who was one of the main players in the insurgency or the illegal overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom government in 1893. And basically, he's telling Dole in that evidence that's actually can be found on the Mission House Museum website, in their archive, digital archive, that evidence basically says, don't tell anyone that I recognize the provision of government before you have control of the police station. So again, that's already a smoking gun there, and more evidence that Blount's report is actually valid. And that's basically physical evidence that Blount never had, but came to the same conclusion through his investigation. So on the other side, we have Morgan's report. So his relation to Hawaii's history, he chaired an investigation known as the Morgan, and it came to be known as the Morgan Report. The aim for that report was to vindicate the actions of Minister John Stevens and the USS Boston Captain Wilkes' involvement in the legal overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom government. It's stated that that's what his goal was to, maybe not in those exact words, but his goals was to prove that the U.S. had no involvement in the illegal overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom government, right? And again, with that smoking gun, that kind of like knocks that thing out, right? He also is noted and found to believe that a plebiscite in Hawaii was unnecessary for annexation. Now, again, if you're studying constitutional law, one of the pieces is that in order for a country to become part of the United States, they need a 3/4 vote. And so what happens was they didn't get it, right? And so again, his whole mana'o was that through the Newlands Resolution, they didn't need to actually get permission from the people of a different country called the Hawaiian Kingdom in order for them to become part of a different country called the United States. All right. And so again, we know that under international law and under US constitutional law, that's not correct. All right. And so some people say, like, look at Texas and how Texas became, and I'm creating another video for that one. And so stay tuned for that. And I'll talk about a little bit about why the annexation of Texas and the annexation of Hawaii is actually not the same ball game, right? Or speaking apples and oranges. But he was a big proponent for the pro-annexation. And again, he stated that too. He is also appointed by President McKinley, who was a predecessor of President Cleveland, who was also a pro-annexationist, that to establish a government in the territory of Hawaii. So again, lots of things happen in a short period of time during this time period here, where again, we have the provisional government coming in, taking over. We have them changing their name to the Republic of Hawaii in the midst of the investigations and Cleveland's report to Congress. And then we have them turn into the Territorial Act of the United States, again, changing it and changing Hawaii into a so-called territory of the U.S. And all this, all the while, people like Mr. Morgan here is saying that the people of Hawaii don't need the Hawaiian natives, the subjects, the native Hawaiians, who are, by the way, not necessarily just ethnic Hawaiians, but we're talking about Hawaiians as Hawaiian nationals, people of the nation of the Hawaiian Kingdom, who are made up of all ethnicities, many varied colors and from all around the world. And so he's saying that they don't necessarily need to say they want to be a part of Hawaii in order for it to be annexed. And the way it can be done is the same way that they annexed Texas. right? And that's why I'll mention more of that in another follow-up video. And so real quick, I just wanted to add one more piece of information that I think that is vital. In the United States of America, there are three branches of government or separation of powers. We have the executive branch, who is the president, and basically the president deals with international relations, treaties, and so forth, and executive agreements that go between countries. That's his job. He executes that and executes the laws. So again, he doesn't make the laws. The president actually signs them into law so that the judicial, the second arm, the judicial, or the judges, the Supreme Court, can actually rule on those laws. And so one thing I want you to understand, and the third one is the legislative body, so the House and the Senate. Now, these three pieces, as most people know, are very important for the checks and balances of power in the United States of America. But what people don't often realize is that when dealing with foreign countries and outside of our international law in America, that is the Department of the executives area, right? And he works with attorney generals and he works with his different committees, but basically that's basically agreements between the executives, right? The kings or the presidents. That's their job. They deal with foreign international relations, right? The legislative body, which is the House and the Senate, they deal with the laws that impact and basically the laws within the United States. All right. And so what's kind of interesting here is that if you look at these two, the Blount's report was actually commissioned by the president. Blount was not working as a House member. He was not working as part of the legislature. He was actually working as an envoy for the executive branch. So his investigation was actually an investigation into the facts to gather more intel relating to what the situation, but as an arm of the international relations, aka the power of the executor, right? And then we look at the Morgan report. Now, what happens if you didn't understand, in the Blount report, Minister Stevens is actually relieved of duty, and so is USS Captain Wiltz. And so they are actually brought back to the United States. And according to the Constitution of the United States and the Hawaiian Kingdom Constitution, their involvement was found to have been treasonous against the government. And so, according to the law, they're brought back to the United States and they're put on trial. And so, Senator Morgan's report was actually an investigation into that deals with the trial of Minister Stevens and Captain Wiltz. So we're talking apples and oranges here. The Blount report is reporting on the facts that gain intel what happened on an international incident. The Morgan report is dealing specifically with the trial, and like I said, the vindication, but the trial nonetheless, which is it's an internal or domestic or municipal hearing or law. So even the origin of the reports are totally different. One is dealing with international relations and the happenings of the international situation, and one is dealing with an internal U.S. domestic situation. And so that needs to, I think for me and my understanding of this in Hawaiian history, that's a huge piece that people don't actually understand. When you go and search the Morgan report or the Blount report information, they say, oh, these two reports and we're comparing them together like apples and apples. Well, actually, you have to understand, first of all, how the separation of powers in the United States of America works, right? The executive, the legislative, and then the judicial branches. Once you understand that, then you understand the difference between international, right, and municipal or domestic rulings. And so regardless of the results of either report, my monotonui for that is basically this, is that one is dealing with international relations, as the Hawaiian Kingdom is a separate country that does not have a treaty of cession, right, into the United States. And the other one is dealing with the so-called conspirators that conspired with the provisional government insurgents to revolt against another country called the Hawaiian Kingdom, right? And holding those people accountable for treason. Now, you can do your own research more and find out what really happened to Stevens and what happened to the USS Captain. But again, that's kind of the rundown between these two reports, and hopefully that clarifies a little bit about the reports. I did link them both down there for you on the bottom, but again, don't believe me, don't believe the internet, okay? Believe nothing, validate every fact. Mahalo nui a o ko pakahi a pau i ka ho'olohe ana mai, hui hou.